Welcome to my channel. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about HMP Wakefield, also known as Monster Mansion. Now, a lot of my videos, when I've done videos on HMP Franklin, and that is now also dubbed Monster Mansion, a lot of the subscribers, a lot of the commenters are saying that's not Monster Mansion. Wakefield is actually the original Monster Mansion. But Franklin recently, over the last maybe about 10 years, because of the inmates that are housed there, has also become known as Monster Mansion. But when the papers refer to it, and I'll probably refer to it in future videos as Monster Mansion 2, because HMP Wakefield is the original Monster Mansion. And as you can imagine, the reason why it's called Monster Mansion is because the inmates that are in there aren't even, or you wouldn't even class them as humans. You would class them as monsters. And that's for the offences that they're inside of prison for. The crimes that they're in there for are the worst of the worst. And the majority of the inmates in there are in for S offences. I'll not say the full title of that, what they are, but you can imagine and you know what I'm trying to say. And that is the reason why it's become known as that, because, like I've said, the majority of the inmates that are in there are that type of offender. So what I'm going to do is do a brief description. I'm going to read some stuff out what I found on the internet, just to give you a background about Monster Mansion, Wakefield, and the inmates that have been in there, past and present. And whilst I was researching this, I came across one inmate who's actually in Monster Mansion at the minute, who I've never actually heard before. I never seen it on the news at the time. It wasn't in the mainstream media. So I'm going to give a brief description. I'm going to talk a little bit about him. But without further ado, I'm going to get into it. So, to start off with, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Wakefield Prison. So HMP Wakefield is a Category A men's prison in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, England, operated by His Majesty's Prison Service. The prison has been nicknamed the Monster Mansion due to the large number of high-profile, high-risk, and the bit that I'll highlight there, like I've mentioned previously, I don't mention that word in my videos no longer because it always flags up and they never get monetized. So Wakefield was originally built as a house of correction in 1594. Most of the current prison buildings date from the Victorian era. The current prison was designed a dispersal prison in 1967, holding 144 inmates, and is the oldest of the dispersal prisons still operating across England and Wales. The English Dialect Dictionary indicates references to Wakefield were often short for return to long-standing prison. Example, being sent to Wakefield. Wakefield meant being sent to prison. During the First World War, Wakefield was used as a Home Office work camp. The ordinary criminal prisoners were removed, and the new influx was sentenced to 2 or more years imprisonment for refusing to obey military orders. And after the closure, the Dice work camp in October 1916, Wakefield Prison was also used to intern conscientious objectors. In September 1918, a group of conscientious objectors took advantage of a slackening in the prison regime that occurred towards the end of the war by rebelling and refusing to undertake any work. They issued a list of demands for better treatment known as the Wakefield Manifesto. As a high security prison, Wakefield was used to house IRA prisoners intermittently during the 20th century. In some cases in the 1950s, the IRA attempted to free the prisoners, such as Cathal Golden in 1956. The attempt was aborted when the siren sounded, and James Andrew Mary Murphy in 1959, who was freed during a hunger strike by provisional IRA prisoners, Frank Stagg died in Wakefield Prison on the 12th of February 1976. The case brought international media attention as the British government denied Stagg's last request for a military funeral march from Dublin to Ballina, and instead arranged for the Irish police to bury him secretly. On the 1st of March 1976, Merlin Rees, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in the Wilson Ministry, announced that those people convicted of causing terrorist offences would no longer be entitled to special category status, which was challenged during later hunger strikes. Recent history: in 2001 it was announced that the new ultra-secure unit was to be built at Wakefield Prison. The unit was to house the most dangerous inmates within the British prison systems and was the first such unit of its kind to be built in the United Kingdom. Now they'll probably go on to mention the first person that pops into my head when I'm reading this, and that is Robert Maudsley, who is the longest serving inmate in such unit in Wakefield Prison. In March 2004, an inspection report from Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons criticised staff at Wakefield Prison for being disrespectful to inmates. The report claimed that the prison was over-controlled and a third of the prison inmates claimed to have been victimised. Wakefield Prison holds approximately 600 of Britain's most dangerous people, mainly that type of offenders like I've mentioned previously, and prisoners serving life sentences. The majority of them are in there now, even in the high security estates where Frankland, Wakefield, Whitemore, Full Sutton, Long Lawton, the majority of the inmates inside of these prisons are lifers that are in for murder. Accommodation at the prison comprises single occupancy cells with integral sanitation. All residential units have kitchens available for offenders to prepare their own meals. An incentive and earned privileges system allows standard and enhanced offenders the opportunity of in-cell TV. Like other HMP prisons, all offenders are subject to mandatory drug testing, and there are voluntary testing arrangements which are compulsory for all offenders employed. For example, wing cleaners and kitchen workers. So when it goes on to mention there about kitchens on the wings, but I've mentioned it previously in my videos when I was in HMP Franklin, which is another high security prison. We were allowed to buy our own food on the canteen list. Obviously, if you haven't got money to afford it and you didn't have a job in prison, you can't do that. You've just got to eat the prison food. But all the high security prisons have got kitchens where even on a Sunday you go and cook a Sunday roast. HMP Wakefield offers a range of activities for inmates, including charity work, an accredited course in industrial cleaning, and a braille shop where offenders convert books to braille. The education department is operated by the Manchester College and offers learning opportunities ranging from basic skills to open university courses. Other facilities include a prison shop, gym, and multi-faith chaplaincy. A prison inspection in 2018 found that Wakefield Prison was on the whole calm, secure, decent, and well managed. Still, prisoners needing psychiatric care face unacceptable delays before they are transferred to secure psychiatric hospitals, and prisoners' mental conditions worsen while they are waiting for transfer. Peter Clark said because of the totally unacceptable delays in doing so, many prisoners across the prison estate are held in conditions that are not in any way therapeutic, and indeed many cases clearly exasperate their conditions, which is about the same for just about every prison across not even just England, Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales. The situations in the prisons because of the overcrowding are diabolical. So when you're waiting for healthcare, it's the same out here in the community as well. It's not just the prisons. If you're suffering badly with your mental health, you've got to wait months just to see someone and get the right medication if you need it. The situation at Wakefield was yet another example of prisoners with severe illness not receiving the care that they needed. Inspectors noted a prisoner who was exceptionally challenging to manage and had complex needs that could not be met in the prison. While staff attempted to manage him positively and constructively, his condition was deteriorating during a lengthy wait to be admitted to a secure hospital, according to the inspection report. So that's the background of Wakefield Prison, thanks to the courtesy of Wikipedia. So there's a picture of Wakefield in 1916. And it just looks the same now. But I've just seen another picture earlier on, which was in 1944 in the engineering workshops. Not sure who the prisoners are there, but I'll go on to show you some pictures of, where's it at, sorry, this one here. So that's the outside of the prison, and all of these high security prisons have got their massive walls on the outside there. As you can imagine, they need these type of walls to keep the type of inmates inside. Actually, that one looks like 2 seconds. I need to go back onto that one there, because that's Wakefield Prison, but it actually looked a little bit like Strangeways when I first looked at it. But this bit here is your central hub, where all the screws stay. The screws have got the officers in here. Most of the prisons, or the high security ones, are set out like that, so they can just see down all the different wings. As you can see here, I'm not sure which wings these are, but just imagine you've got A, B, C, and D. They're all locked off by different gates, so the prisoners can't just walk from that wing onto that wing. There's gates keeping them all housed on the same unit, but the screws in this central office can see down all of the wings and see what's going on. There's the insides, and there's another one of the notorious inmates who I'd done a video on not so long back, who was Ian Watkins, who was the lead singer of the Lost Prophets. And the reason I've done the video on him, because he was assaulted in the prison and he was stabbed up by another inmate. But if you haven't seen the video, go back and look at my previous videos and you'll see all about him and the story that I've done on him. And this is some of the past and present inmates from HMP Wakefield. But a lot of them you'll recognise and you'll know them all. But a lot of the times when I'm looking through images or videos or whatever, as you can see down here, Mr. Charles Bronson with his big smile there underneath his tash. It's a bit disrespectful putting him on a load of pictures with the likes of him here, who is Roy Whiting, Ian Huntley, Levi Belfield. Charles Bronson isn't in the same category as any of these. Yes, he's a notorious inmate, and he's always had that title. He's got a film out about himself. Not about himself, sorry. There's a film being made about him. But he isn't in the same category as any of these. He's never murdered anybody. He's never harmed children. He's never harmed women. Not unlike the monsters that are on this page here. So I've showed you a lot of the pictures there, and what I'm going to do now, actually that was one of the videos that I'd done, I think. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is mention a few people that are in this prison. That's a little bit like, so it says here, the current inmates include Jeremy Bamber, who you'll all know, who was charged for the murder of his mother, father, sister, and her two sons in Essex on August the 6th, 1985. Sidney Cook, a child, I'll not say that word, and a serial killer described by the Guardian newspaper in 1999 as Britain's most notorious, and Reynard Sonoga. This is the one I'm going to mention next because I've never heard of him before, but when I was researching a little bit on Wakefield prison, his name popped up, and when it says here he was convicted of 159 offences, including 136 rapes of young men in Manchester between 2015 and 2017. And here are some of the most notorious inmates of Wakefield prison over the decades. Kamal Borges murdered police officer Stephen Oak in a bloody attack in Manchester in 2003. Mr. Oak attempted to apprehend the Algerian as part of an immigration operation at a flat, but Borges picked up a kitchen knife and launched into a frenzied attack, stabbing the unarmed police officer 8 times in the chest and upper body. Jeremy Bamber was found guilty, like I've just mentioned. I'll not say it all again, but everyone will know how Jeremy Bamber is. He's always maintained his innocence and has repeatedly appealed the conviction, but remains unsuccessful. And that is up for debate because there's a lot of people who's followed the case believe he's innocent. So if anyone wants to debate that in the comments, because I know a lot of people have mentioned it previously, but I've just mentioned him, Ian Watkins. I've done a video on him. He was sentenced to 29 years imprisonment for offences, including the assault of Young in 2013. He began his sentence in Wakefield, but was then transferred to HMP Long Lartin in 2014, but then he was sent back to HMP Wakefield when he was found with a phone in Long Lartin. Now, a lot of these faces that pop up you'll recognise straight away. Millie Dowler killer Levi Belfield, who was convicted of murdering Marshall McDonnell, and Amelie Delagrange, and the attempted murder of Kate Sheedy in 2008, and he was later moved to HMP Frankland. Robert Black was convicted of the murder of 4 young girls. He was taken to Wakefield prison to begin his sentence in the segregation unit. He died from a heart attack in HMP Magri on the 12th of January 2016. Now here's another one I've done a video on, Mark Bridger from Wales. And the reason why I've done the video on him was because he was part of the Life Without Parole series that I do on my channel. There is a playlist if you want to go down and have a look. Klaus, as that second name suggests, Klaus Fuchs, or Fuchs, or however you pronounce it, was a German theoretical physicist and atomic spy who was convicted in 1950 of supplying information to the Soviet Union during the Second World War. He spent 9 years and 4 months in Wakefield prison, then migrated to East Germany, where he resumed his career as a physicist and scientific leader. Ian Huntley doesn't need introducing. Everybody knows who that monster is, but he's actually now in Frankland, and that's why Frankland is Monster Mansion number 2, because a lot of these that I'm mentioning now are actually up there. Colin Island was a British serial killer who murdered 5 gay men in a 3-month span. Harold Shipman, everyone will know who he is. He died in Frankland prison. Got moved up there again. All of these monsters have ended up in Frankland. But Charles Bronson, like I've mentioned, he's he's always getting put in the same category as these lot, but from my perspective, Charles Bronson is or doesn't deserve to be in the same category as those lot that I've just been mentioning. And Robert Maudsley, I've done a video on him. If you haven't seen it, go back and have a look. The majority of you'll know who Robert Maudsley is, but Robert Maudsley killed 4 men. But the ones that Robert Maudsley was actually killing are ones that he was a sort of a vigilante because he was abused as a child. And the first murder he committed was against an ex-offender. And when he went to prison, he went on to kill another 3 inmates. He killed 1 in Broadmoor and 2 in Wakefield prison. So it says Robert Maudsley has been dubbed Britain's real Hannibal the Cannibal and has spent more than 40 years in solitary confinement. Robert Maudsley spends his days locked away in a special underground cell under Wakefield prison and is one of the country's longest serving prisoners. And that's what I was on about when I mentioned him earlier on. He's the longest serving inmate in this specially built cell in the units in Wakefield prison. So I'm going to go on to tell you now about Reynard Sonoga, if that's how you pronounce it. And that's him there. Now, let us know in the comments if you've actually heard of this fella, because I'd never seen or heard of this case until I was looking up on Wakefield prison. So, Indonesian student Sonoga, who had lived in Manchester since 2007, instead of saying I'm going to say it, graped, just so I keep mentioning it doesn't pop up on the automated service. But Indonesian student Sonoga, who had lived in Manchester since 2007, drugged and raped 44 men and assaulted a further 4 during a campaign of rape that lasted more than 2 years. But detectives believe the true number of victims is actually 195, based on the hundreds of hours of footage Sonoga filmed during the attacks. Sonoga lured drunk men back to his apartment in Manchester city centre before lacing their drinks with GHB and raping them while they were unconscious. During the podcast, the MEN also speaks to Duncan Craig, CEO of Survivors Manchester, a charity that works to help the male victims. He hopes the case will break down the stigma around male rape and make people more aware of personal safety. He said, We've said before, Manchester's had more than its fair share of trauma. We've bounced back and we still bounce back from this. We'll be a stronger city. But this fella here, Raymond Sonoga, or should I say this monster, when it says he's been following or waiting for drunk men outside of nightclubs, if a drunken man comes outside, lost his phone, lost his wallet or whatever, someone like him is offering help, he doesn't look like a typical, he does look a bit weird, he looks a bit creepy, but he doesn't look like the type that would be doing this sort of behaviour. So Raymond, I'll just talk a little bit about his background, because obviously I'm talking about the monsters that are in Wakefield prison. And like I've mentioned, when I read up on this, and I hadn't actually heard of the case before, it is quite a disturbing case. But Sonoga was born in 1983 in city of Jambi in Jambi, Indonesia, and grew up in Depok, West Java. Growing up in an affluent conservative Catholic family, he is ethnically from the Batak people. After completing a degree in architecture at the Faculty of Engineering of the University of Indonesia into POC in 2006. He moved to the UK on a student visa and began to study in August 2007 at the University of Manchester, where he completed an MSc in urban planning in 2009. So I'm not going to go on to read the full article about him. Just going to talk a little bit about what he was actually in for. Sonoga lived in a flat in central Manchester which acted as a base for his assaults. He would wait for men leaving nightclubs and bars before leading them to his flat, often offering them somewhere to have a drink or call a taxi. Giving them a drugged drink believed to have been spiked with GHB, Sonoga would then assault the victims while they were unconscious and video the attack with a mobile phone. He rarely used condoms. I'm not even going to talk about because it'll end up flagging up. It's too... You can just read that yourself there. At the time of his sentence was announced in January 2020, almost all of Sonoga's victims were known to have been heterosexual young men, with 3 exceptions. But when I've read up on it, it goes on to say that a lot of his victims hadn't even known this had happened because they were so out of it. And when he drugged the drinks, it wasn't until the police seen the attacks on the phones and obviously traced the victims down, they didn't even know that this monster had been attacking them. But he'll be right at home in amongst the monsters in Monster Mansion, because the sickos in there will probably, on association time, be letting him act out his sick fantasies on them, because in the prisons across the UK, when people have asked, is it the same as the American prisons, where in America you'll have seen the prisons where the inmates are freely can't even refer to it as making love, raping each other. I've done a video on the other week about a young inmate in Alabama who had been abused and murdered by the other inmates. And I was asked, does this go on in the UK prisons? Well, it does, but it's never on the general population wings. It's always on the wings that's got these type of beasts in. And this is where these type of offences or these type of sickening acts go on with each other. Because if you can imagine, you've got the likes of all of them type of inmates living with each other, offenders, you can't tell me that they won't be living out the sick fantasies with each other, monster on top of monster. It doesn't bear thinking about. But I've covered a few cases about people inside Wakefield prison, and I will be covering more, because like I've mentioned, a lot of people find it interesting and a lot of it isn't in the mainstream media and you never really hear about it. But there is a lot of attacks that goes on inside the high security prisons on the class as the VP wings, which stands for vulnerable prisoner. And they're only classed as a vulnerable prisoner is because they're vulnerable to attack from the fellas or the lads on the general population wings. But there's a one that has just popped up there. Richard Huckle. I've done a video on him. I'll do an updated one. He was another sick individual that was living in Monster Mansion, but his life actually ended inside Monster Mansion when another inmate acted out his own prison justice and took Huckle's life. I've done a video on it, like I've mentioned, but I will do an updated one. But Richard Huckle left HMP Wakefield Monster Mansion in a body bag. But I've covered quite a bit there on Monster Mansion, and I will cover some more prisons. And if you are wanting us to do any topics on any other prisons, whether it be in the UK, in the USA, Ireland, let us know, and I will cover more prisons and more stories about what's happened in the prisons across the world. But if you are enjoying this content, people, as always, remember to comment, like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss another video. And again, thank you for your continuing support. Hope you enjoyed the video. Go down and have a look at all my other videos. There's about 300 and odd, plenty for you to get through. Enjoy the rest of your day, people. Take care.